call the Economic Development Plan Review Committee to order. Start with the agenda and roll call.
Blessum.
Here.
Feldner. Hammer.
Here.
Howe. Here. Neither.
Yes.
Nelson.
Here.
Bittner.
Here.
Okay, continuing on, we'll do the pledge. I pledge allegiance to
the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, continuing on with the approval of the minutes, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the February 7th meeting.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any discussion, any adjustments for anybody? Okay, call the roll.
Bittner.
Yes.
Blessum.
Yes.
Hammer.
Yes.
Howe. Yes. Neither.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Okay, continuing on to new business. So we got two items that we're going to go through today. The first is sort of a continuation, and I see Mark here as well, which is great in case we've got questions that come up. But we're going to move through Exhibit 1 from the MAC EDC contract and just look at the deliverables and make sure that there aren't any adjustments we want to suggest. Or, you know, I think we talked about during the discussion over the last two meetings that there's a lot here, and it's just a good time to maybe take a look at those and see if there's any adjustments we need to make. And so, Michaela, if you're able to bring those up
Yeah,
for
I
us.
think Jen had them on her computer too, which she can
Okay,
probably
yeah.
make bigger, but she'll pull them up. If not, I am plugged into Dias number 4.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we'll just start at the top of these. So these are the deliverables that MEC EDC is charged with delivering for the city and its taxpayers under their contract. So we'll just start with A. Again, we'll work through these. I'm not going to read them, but certainly if there's anything that we want to discuss, we should definitely do that. So, you know, some of these are you know, maybe necessarily broad, you know, saying that MAC EDC will execute on its comprehensive strategic plan. Yeah, I hope so. I think that's, you know, that's the idea of what they're doing. And so certainly they're going to want to do those. Now, whether there's a deliverable that we measure back from the city side, I'm not sure what that would look like, but I think it'd be one of those things where, you know, certainly if we saw that, boy, we're not seeing enough in the military support pillar, we would ask a question, I think. I think that's kind of how that would go. So I guess for me, this is, does something like that need to be in our list of deliverables? I guess would be the question. Thoughts?
And, can you elaborate on that? As far as what? Some sort of, what more are you looking for as far as deliverables?
So in my mind, the set of deliverables are there to ensure that the taxpayer is getting their value for the contract, right? That's the idea. So one of the thought processes I have is that I would love to see our ongoing conversation with MAC EDC leadership be around what successes are we seeing. I think today we get a whole lot of bullets of a whole lot of activity rather than the focus on, okay, what are we getting for what we're buying, right? And there are a bunch of pieces in here, and we'll see some of those about, you know, how many business retention reviews are we doing and pieces like that are activity-based. And so really, I just raised the question, I think we go all the way through letter R, so A through R would be what, about 20-some deliverables, early 20s deliverables. Is this the right set? Are we asking them to perform the right things? And maybe another way to look at it is, do we have a way of measuring it? So when we say they'll execute their plan, I don't know how we know if they are, I guess, unless we saw a deficiency.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yeah,
could
go
on
ahead, Tyler.
that topic. You know, I kind of have some similar thoughts. I think I want to kind of approach it in a little bit different way and have the board of MAC EDC kind of handle some of those metrics that you're referring to and say, as a board, here's what we would like to see. We want to see job growth. We want to see that measured in how many jobs are in the community and are they growing. We want to see measure GDP. Is GDP growing in Minot? We want to measure the average pay, pay per employee or per job increase. We want to see the average age of our labor force be decreasing. We want to see housing starts be at X. We want to see the average age of a business become less in the community. There's tons of metrics that we could throw out there. However, rather than the city of Minot saying, hey, we're gonna give you this money and you must meet these, because let's face it, if they don't meet those, are we just gonna pull money from the EDC? I don't think that's the right way to go. So from my standpoint, what I'd like to see is the, put it back on MAC EDC, and their board to come up with some of those metrics and how do they wanna measure success, et cetera, and, have them handle it internally. That's me personally.
And I appreciate that, Tyler. I think as we go through them, what you're talking about may become pretty evident that that's not the way we're doing it today, right? I think that's part of that. Now that's not to say that necessarily we can go fully there, because some of this stuff is activity based, some of it is focused on that. But I think in terms of delivering value for the taxpayer, I think there should be a decent mix of that. So, and Paul, you've been around this. If you got anything to add, Jordan, go ahead.
You know, I was just gonna, maybe this is related, piggyback off of what you said, to looking at value to the taxpayer. If I take a 10,000-foot view on all of this, you've got the Chamber EDC doing what it's doing. You have the internal community development side doing what it's doing. Are there efficiencies that can be gained by, you know, are we working together in the best possible way to get the best bang for the buck via how this is structured? Maybe what needs to be done is we need to structure more on them. Who's doing it better, you know, and look at it that way. And how do we measure that and determine if there are better ways to do that?
Right. You know, I guess just along those lines, if as we look across city spending, the vast majority of what we do is very clear what the result is, right? So we're paying staff, we're you know, in 2025, we're spending $11 million on roads. I look forward to seeing the results of what spending $11 million on our roads is going to look like this year. And I think this is one, it's not $11 million, but there's a good amount of money going in this direction. And I think the sort of overall vibes overall are good. The question would be, are the results there that go along with that? What are some of the wins? And, you know, like we talked about in a previous meeting, I'm not sure that, you know, things like the fourth McDonald's is the win that everybody needs. You know, but there are great wins. There are other things that have gone very, very well. And so how do we get at that? And is the contract the right place to do that? And, you know, Harold, certainly along the way, if you got anything that, you know, from your side to add on this as well, that would be good. But, you know, I think this is kind of the precursor to start to run through these quick and kind of checking in on each of the bullet points. Because again, I don't know that we've got to go all the way through in terms of holding them accountable if there were 10 items that really, really made sense. You know, has this list just kind of grown over time, or where should it be?
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
That was gonna be my question is like, what did the 2024 service agreement look like? Was it exactly the same? Was it, I mean,
Believe
what,
it changed much.
what
Mark, go
changes
ahead.
and how did we get to this point
Yep.
of this service agreement, I guess is my question.
Good question, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Much of what's in this agreement has been in here for a couple of years. Going back previously to 2021 or 2022, I don't know that I could speak directly to what the details of the services agreement were. I can say that you've added, or the staff has added in working with the Chamber EDC, like item H and I and G, because it was 2 years ago now that you said, hey, we want you to focus more on workforce development. And I believe it was Councilman Pipner that said, okay, if we gave you $50,000 or $75,000 more, go do more in workforce development. And we're doing more in workforce development. That's now a pillar of a strategic pillar of the organization. So again, G, H, I, J would have all been added 2 years ago. Mr. Chairman, another question that was floated that I think I could answer or add some light on is when you talk about the comprehensive strategic plan in item A, if you go to our comprehensive strategic plan, it doesn't just have pillars, it also has goals and it has measurements. And then we determine the tactics on the staff level. And some of those tactics are in here, like doing a BRNE is a tactic, is an activity. I would say, I don't know another colleague of mine that doesn't do BRNEs in the economic development world. It's probably good to have it in there. If you want to see a number specifically for something like that, that's fine. But know that if you don't put it in there, it's not like I'm gonna be like, whoo, I'm done with those 400 hours of my my year. I'm gonna quit. I'm gonna do something else. No, that we clearly see value in that, whether it's in the service agreement or not. It's a tactic we're going to use. So I understand the back and forth conversation about how do you, and what are the metrics you use. The Chamber EDC or anyone who held this contract wouldn't be responsible for average salaries. Like, I don't go out and tell a business their salary, so should I be responsible to make sure that that salary goes up? I mean, if I'm doing my job in the broader sense, there's a good chance that that salary will go up, but no guarantee, right? I mean, we have a recession tomorrow, and then you come back and say in 6 months or a year, the average salary didn't go up, we're done with your funding. You guys didn't do your job. So it's hard to, this is the quandary in the economic development world. I can tell you all the activities I'm doing, I just can't go make a business give you more money. I can't go make a business open up a fourth McDonald's. I can't make a second Walmart come here. Again, some of those decisions are not mine to be made, so it's hard to say that should be in my contract. But it's also hard not to say that you shouldn't have something in the contract. So good luck with that. Yeah.
I appreciate
so
that.
the quandary is broad, and it's industry wide. This isn't just like, wow, man, everybody else has got these, and Minot Area Chamber EDC has never put these things into a contract. That's the tough conversation.
Go ahead.
If I may, just to provide some background and some history. So I think when I first got here as a city manager, I don't believe there was a contract between the city and MACDC. And we were giving city funds to multiple entities without any contracts or agreements in place. So one of the things I implemented in is if you're receiving city funds, there needs to be an agreement in place. And so as far as the first one with regards to the comprehensive plan and strategic plan and those kinds of things, what I heard at the time when I came in was the chamber is still in this transition mode of combining the Economic Development Corporation and the chamber together. We still don't really know what that means. What's their role? What are they doing? So this element of they were there, and what they told us was we're developing a strategic plan. And what I heard is, well, we've been told that for a long time. So this was put in the contract as a deliverable. You need to finish this. Like, we need a strategic plan. We as a community need to know what's your function, what's your role, and how you're going to go about doing that. Now, contracts adapt and change over time. So if you feel like that's been addressed, then you're probably correct that no longer needs to be in the contract, but that's why it's here. Mm-hmm. The other element here, too, is that we as the city are using taxpayer dollars to basically contract with MACDC to provide certain services to us as the city on behalf of the community. And what are those services that we're paying for? And for me, those are the things like they're the lead on business retention expansion, right? That's a service we're paying for. We're contributing to the administrative costs and the salary costs so they have the resources to be able to do that, right? Which is why that's outlined. And you can continue through this along that same regards of these are the services that we as the city using taxpayer dollars are investing in on behalf of the community. Yes, some of them are things that they would likely do. Now, you could argue how effectively they're going to be able to do it. If we pull funding away, maybe business retention expansion interviews go down. And instead of achieving 65% a year, maybe they go down to 30% a year, right? Those are the impacts. But this contract allows us to have those conversations and set those expectations, right? And so that's kind of the purpose and the driver of this, and a little bit of the background and the history. So
Thanks for that, Harold. So with that in mind, one way to look at this would be to say we have outsourced this rather than hiring staff, right? So the list of items we have here, another way to look at it is this would be a job description or a couple job descriptions. So these are items that if we had hired a staff member internally to perform these same functions, that's how we would also have been measuring them. Are you doing these interviews? Are you doing this piece? Are you representing us here? Is that a good way to think of that?
yeah, or another way to look at it, a common terminology, this is the scope of service that we're paying for.
Yep. Okay. All right. So great. So with that in mind, and yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
To what you just said on the job description, one of the questions I've had in my mind in the last week is, I work for a small company, limited limited staff. We outsource a lot. We're outsourcing more. Is that more cost effective to the taxpayers? I don't know the answer to that. You know, I had to do some snooping through some of the 2025 budget to try and get an idea, and I don't know that. But, like, is that something worth exploring? You know, I hesitate to use everybody in government's favorite D word these days, Doge. Like, I'm not saying they're doing everything perfect, but they're bringing attention to some of this stuff. If the taxpayers want a leaner, meaner economic development side of things, is that something that can be accomplished through expanding a partnership with Chamber EDC and coming back the other direction to, you know, in my world, in the banking world, I can outsource my internal audit to Brady Martz and Associates and pay them $30,000. But if I got to hire somebody to do it, I'm not getting it for $30,000. Not even close.
Right, and you know, just to, looking back at history there, I think it was Mitt Romney that got himself in big trouble for saying, I like being able to fire people, right? And so that's really what something like this is about. This exhibit is about not firing, but about saying, hey, here's the parameters of what we're expecting and what we're paying for. Let's make sure that they're being delivered.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
I think Mark raised a really good question, because the idea that the actual results of the work that's being done is sort of out of our control, that's a problem everywhere, right? I mean, that, you know, we have lots of contracts, we have lots of, not just city things, but lots of agreements are entered into all over the world every single day without good deliverables in terms of, hey, I think it's gonna do this, but we don't know. And I was working with a company this morning on a valuation that, we're looking at the future and thinking, yeah, the future looks good, but we have to deliver as well. We have to deliver on that future and actually execute on the points. And I think that's sort of the gut feel that I get as we work through this, is that, you know, I've gotten to know these guys. I've gotten to know Brecca. We work through this, and I feel good about the things they're doing. What I don't feel good about is, how do we know if it's working? And how do we know if the whole method is good? I think right now, the best we can do is say, kind of how everybody does it, and it's sort of the best practices we know of. So keep throwing the spaghetti, and hopefully some of it's sticking.
You know, and that was one of the questions I was going to ask on this contract too. What are our peers doing? You know, Fargo, Grand Forks, Bismarck. I'm assuming they probably have something similar.
Yep. Good. It's great to have you here, Mark. I'm
Mr.
glad.
Chairman, members of the committee, I can answer that question.
Perfect.
We've reached out to, and I won't bore you with reading off their exact contract, and these are public documents. So I'll just say it rhymes with Schmijmark instead of the actual name of the city. They have services to be provided under their contract. There are 3 bold points. The bold points, one is economic development strategy and implementation. The second one is economic development analysis. And the third one is public-private partnerships. They have anywhere from 1 bullet point to 6 bullet points underneath each of those. And they're generally within those bullet points, it's like provide staff assistance on vision fund requests. So that's their version of the Magic Fund. Another one is create strategic economic development strategies and action plans. Provide strategic data-driven advice regarding the feasibility of various development types and this is the language that they're using in their contract. Another one tied to public-private partnerships. Project cash flows based on existing projects and projected projects to assist with obtaining financing, including gap financing, bonding, grant, and loan opportunities. That's relatively standard language. We've asked for others across the state, and we've seen very similar stuff. Sometimes it's very minimal. It's a paragraph or 2. Sometimes it's more prescriptive.
Say, Mark, follow up on that. Do you know ballpark, obviously not exact, but what those other cities are spending on some of that stuff?
It varies wildly, in part because some of those are, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it varies wildly because some of them have set up, like a West Fargo has an economic development administrator in their office.
Right.
City of Williston, actually their Williston Economic Development Group is part of the city. So you have, it's really hard to compare apples to apples. I would say, like, in Grand Forks is a good example. They've got a setup now where that was similar to us 5 years ago, where they've got a chamber of commerce that's got 3 or 4 staff, 4 or 5 staff, I think at least, and then an economic development wing. So it's even hard to compare to someone who's almost the same size as us, who has an Air Force base that's in the upper Midwest. It's just, and so they've got 2 different organizations. And then again, this is the quandary with economic development. As soon as you find that peer partner or that peer city somewhere, I could quickly point out 5 major differences that are going to say, well, I can see why you would probably still do it differently than us. So long answer to your short question, but it really just varies.
I just kind of like to point out too, because my background is in medicine, and sometimes we can get to a point where we are approving all these metrics that, well, I like to pick people that I feel like I can trust can do the job and that they're educated and they know what they're doing. And I think that we put all these metrics in place and we keep trying to prove things that we almost get into a micromanaging situation where we can kind of strangulate the people that we're outsourcing these services to. So I think sometimes, like, it's great to have metrics that prove what you're doing, but we have to be mindful about how much we're micromanaging that. Does that make sense? Like, on the flip side, is sometimes this can really start to bog people down and then hold them back from doing what they need to do.
Yeah, I think certainly putting our thumb on a partner isn't constructive. I think you're right in that. I think as long as things are going the way that we want, we need to give them the freedom to do those things. And I think that's the ongoing quandary is, like I said before, we don't want it running on vibes either, right? Like, hey, it feels like it's good. Like, I think it's good, but I'd like to be able to point to things and say, oh yeah, look at that. That's a result. That was great. And I know we have those, right? We have the port. We have things that are going well. And so, I don't know. I don't know exactly what the right answer is, but yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
And one of the things to that too, there are a lot of, like, to what Tyler said, metrics that we can look at that provide good data, but I don't know that they're solely going to be dependent on the efforts of the Chamber EDC. We can't put everything on them either. Like, for instance, you talk about workforce. Well, workforce is, first off, it's a terrible problem nationwide. I mean, one of the things I wanted to look at when I got on this committee was, well, I bet our unemployment rate is way lower than like Fargo's or Bismarck's. It's not. And, there are problems that come to workforce that are beyond the scope of traditional sense of economic development. Like, if you don't have an adequate supply of housing, who's going to move here? Because you have to pay out the nose to find a house, and we all know, like, housing is going to be priority number 1 at all levels of government, whether it's through property tax relief or, creation of, whatever we can do to get costs down, because if you don't have it, people aren't going to be able to move here even if they want to. Well, that's not what I consider to be a Chamber EDC issue. There are all kinds of other things. So, that's where I'm kind of struggling with this a little bit. Like, you give these guys the keys to the kingdom. Well, they're in my opinion, they've been very good at a lot of this stuff, but some of this stuff the city's got to figure out.
The interesting thing with the way that you just put that is that I think there are pieces that they do and actually do pretty well. So BR&Es are really important to that, right? Because we've got to learn from the clients or the businesses that are here, what's holding them back. Why are they not taking their next step? Or why is the next one like them not coming to town? Sometimes that's housing, sometimes it's workforce shortages, sometimes it's simply cash flow or macroeconomic factors that come into that as well. So, Tyler, do you have something?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I first of all, I want to say that the Chamber EDC does a fantastic job, and sometimes they are the catch-all for so many things. You talk about startup Minot, right? That was one thing that got thrown at you. Hey, Mark, go ahead and set this up, right? And you've done a fantastic job with everything we've thrown at you. So I don't want to make light of anything they're doing, because honestly, I think being involved in a lot of the committees and stuff like that, I know how thin they are stretched. They do a lot for our community. They do a fantastic job. I'm just saying that, yeah, any organization, I don't care if you're a nonprofit, you have some sort of measurement of success. What that is, and actually, I think we'll be baffled if we go and look at what MADC is onboarded, the Chamber EDC is onboarded to Minot with the port or AGT, and we say, okay, we want to look at tax, we want to look at sales tax and real estate taxes, and all of their employees are paying real estate taxes as well. If we go down that, I think we'll be blown away at how much revenue they're generating for the city. I honestly think we'll be blown away if that's something we want to do, but nonetheless, we just need some sort of measure of success, so.
Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think back to some of our earlier presentations when we started this, and I think of Katie with Department of Commerce. The state has now started to look at economic development from a more holistic approach. And I think to your point, Mr. Chair, how do we know if this stuff in the past was working? And in a lot of ways, we didn't. So now we're starting to think we need to look at all of these old measurables, right? And when I think of it, jobs are great, right? But a $15 an hour job at McDonald's, does that move the needle for me? No. But when I think of what our goal as council members is that's to grow the tax base and reduce the tax burden on individuals. That would be a great measurable, right? Has that been done? Do you look at some of the wins from the chamber, whether it be through the port, which went through, I think, at least 2 cracks at the private sector and failed, and really had no future whatsoever, and through the negotiations with the chamber and the city, we've got that working for us now. When you look at the expenses of AGT Foods and their investment into their community, which, let's be honest, there's nothing, I don't want to get in trouble for this. There is a lot of special things about Minot. But there's no reason that AGT Foods was married to this spot. They could do what they do in a lot of different places. Okay, and that's through the partnership with the city and the Chamber EDC for those wins. How long can we just tout that as a win? I don't think that the Chamber EDC is sitting there saying, well, see what we did X amount of years ago. But again, we can point to those things, and I want to give them the resources to be able to do that again. I want to give the city the resources to be able to do that again, and that comes from having regular conversations and having these agreements in place. But metrics are tough too, and even when you think about what is economic development, well, by definition, it's whatever your community finds is appropriate at that given point in time. That changes year to year. What can we do about workforce development? That's going to change tomorrow. What is economic development? What's best in economic development for the city? That's going to change probably by the end of this meeting. Military support, how many Barksdale trophies do we have? I mean, I think they want to hang, if that wants to be our metric, then you guys should probably get some more money for your achievements in that sector. So I agree we need to have some metric, but I think those metrics come in regular lines of communication. Answering to the council, answering to the community, being transparent. And we've worked through that. We had our go-arounds. I was skeptical of the Chamber EDC when I was first elected to the council because I didn't see enough of that relationship that I think needed to be there. The hand in hand, we need to be lockstep, that when you need something, you come to us. And when we need something, we come to you. And I think that to me is the deliverable. That to me is those regular lines of communication, those regular meetings, those regular presentations, not only to the council, but to taxpayers, to say, where is our taxpayer money going? And we can see it, it's outlined, whether to the BREs, whether it's, through workforce development, whether it's being present at the state capitol during these legislative sessions to make sure that Minot's not forgotten about. And when Minot needs resources, whether that's through flood control or business retention and development and economic development, that we are mindful of that, and you're being champions for the city of Minot. So again, it's good luck to all of us, right? If we want to try to figure this out and have some metric and we can just put, 1 + 1 = 2, well, in this case, in a lot of ways, 1 + 1 = D. And nobody knows what D is because it changes. And I'd love to be able to show taxpayers, yep, here you go. That's what you got for your money. That's your ROI on investing in community partners. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, and as long as we're here looking for that, we're going to be looking for a long time, and we can have these meetings until 2035. Again, it just doesn't. I get it. We need to be regular lines of communication, and again, some of these metrics are great, but again, some of these are things that the Chamber EDC is going to do just because that's what's best for the community. And Jordan, to your comment, right? And again, that's the question, right? Should we outsource more to you guys? Should we take more on ourselves? Well, our first bullet point here: fill gaps. funding whether organizations are, or finding where other organizations are not? Or is that part of their scope? Again, it's a moving target, and it's all hands on deck. And I want to empower every one of our partners, whether that's the Chamber EDC, whether it's Visit Minot, whether that's Service Basin Planning Council, whether that's the City of Minot in its own economic development activities, because we're all in line with the same goal in mind, and that's making Minot a better place to live, work, and play.
And so through this, these are good discussions because this is what it kind of helps my mind get around this. So Tyler, back to what you were originally kind of talking about here, it makes me wonder if you've got it exactly right around the types of metrics and the things that we should be looking at, but those aren't deliverables from MAC EDC. Those are actually a dashboard that as city council members we're looking at to say, hey, we've got a bunch of tools that are running. We're spending money on some are partnerships, some are as simple as our internal processes and red tape are improving. And so that's why this is looking better. I think those are all the right metrics that you're talking about, but they're maybe not for this. They've got a role to play, and the MAC EDC is going to deliver on the things that we're asking them to deliver on. But I don't know that today we've got that picture that sits there and says, okay, how did our core key metrics go this quarter or this month or whatever that was? We get updates from finance, we get stuff like that city-wise. But I think, and I know you guys, MAC EDC also publishes some of that information, some of our key metrics like housing starts and average housing sales and all of those types of things. It makes me wonder if that's more of the picture we're actually looking for, or at least that maybe I am on council, are all of our efforts resulting in progress forward for what we want? Because I think that's really the only way that we're, back to what you're saying, Paul, if we ever are going to get to the point where raising the tax base and increasing that so all the boats float better, we're not there yet. And we know that in my mind, that's tied to the mega projects we've got going on more than anything else. We've done those things, but unfortunately, we're sucking up a full sales tax penny with ongoing projects that are no end in sight. I mean, really. And so we're not reaping the benefits of what actually has already happened as we went through the growth that we've had, the oil boom, everything that's gone with it. Okay, so I'll, it's a second to pause. We don't have to do what I thought we could do, which is go through these. Now, that's not to say that there aren't things that could be or should be adjusted in these. So if you guys if we wanted to take another 10 to 15 minutes and just skip through them, we can, in case there's something we go, it doesn't need to be there, or, oh boy, we could add this. I'm happy to do that. But I'm also up, fine with the direction of the committee. If you guys are thinking this isn't the fruit we need right now, we can move on to the second part of the discussion if you like. Any thoughts? Yeah, Justin.
I guess, to be honest with you, I think this is the first time I feel like we've started moving forward as a committee.
Yeah.
I've been getting a lot of education through the whole thing, and that's probably why I've been quiet a lot of times. But the last 5-minute discussion, I think probably was the best 5-minute discussion we've had as a committee. But one question I have is, and I don't want to go backwards here, but before the Chamber EDC merged and there was a Chamber and the EDC, who oversaw the EDC? Was that a city or was that a separate entity when it was just the Economic Development Corporation? And I guess that was years ago, right?
That's okay. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the Minot Area Development Corporation had a board of directors. So it was a similar setup to what MAC EDC looks like today. So the old Minot Area Development Corporation had a board of directors made up of folks in our community, and we had a contract with the city. MADC had at that time a contract with the city. I'm pulling numbers out of my hat here. $350,000, I think, was the contract. Good 5, 6, 7 years ago, pre-COVID. It was in that $300,000, $350,000 range was the contract. And I don't know, again, to Harold's point, I don't think that we had a service agreement pre-COVID. Does that help answer your question?
No, it does.
Just to follow up quick on that, Mark, do you know what that was? What was those funds focused on? Was it meant to?
Much of the same things that are in here.
So-
Yeah, they did.
so it was-
We did
but-
BRNE. That organization did business retention and expansion interviews. That organization, a good 8-10 years ago, had a staff member that was for workforce development. So I couldn't speak to the details of what was done in 2017 specifically with a contract that I wasn't involved with, but yeah, that was the same idea.
Thank you. That's
Do you think, so we did previously have an economic development director, a staff role in the city, and then it was kind of merged in with, for Brian. Do you feel like prior, when we had somebody dedicated, that was more of like a nice liaison relationship, and now maybe that might be missing a little bit by not having someone dedicated, or what are your thoughts on that?
Chairman, I'll try to address that. So my understanding is that for a while, the city did not have a position. There was the IEDC study, and that was one of the recommendations that came out of that study, was that the city should have an economic development administrator position to help kind of be the liaison on that. And so the position was created and filled. I would say that there was some challenges due to the personality of the individual in that position that created some challenges. And then Brian and I kind of came on board and picked up some of that to try to bridge some of those issues. And then we parted ways with the individual. And then there was questions about whether or not the city needed the position, should the chamber be doing these? And then changes in council, and eventually it got removed out of the budget effective January 1 of this year.
So to kind of continue that part of the discussion, and one of the things that we've determined, I think, during our discussions is that there are areas that we know MAC EDC is not likely to do a lot of work in. One of those is retail work, right? I mean, anything that's going to bring a restaurant or a direct competitor to members is going to be difficult for them, and to ask them to do that is not going to be fruitful. So I think these are where this line exists, I think, between what's going on internally and with our contracted partners is an important one. I don't know that there's a perfect answer. Oh, if we just hired this one person, then I would feel really confident in everything that we're doing. But the flip side of it is that we also don't want to leave obvious gaps either. And like Paul was just referring to, that's our first bullet, fill gaps, right? And make sure that we're covering that. So I don't know. I think that's a discussion that the council will continue to have, because it's, on top of everything, it's a budgeting question. Anytime we're adding a FTE, it's one of the few spots that we have to make a real decision on council. So, I don't know if you got anything to add to that, Paul, but.
Yeah, I agree. I think at the end of the day, when you talk about that position specifically, it is so important to get the person right in that role. You're right. Like, I mean, you can have a fire chief, if they know how to fight fires and they can run a department and they know how that works, you can be a stick in the mud, but if you're really good at your job, you're really good at your job. When you're that economic development position, we talk about getting in front of vendors and big box stores. You need to be Minot. You are the biggest cheerleader, the biggest face of Minot that we have. That's a representative outside of, and everybody is, right? Everybody you want nice smiley people in every position, right, Michaela? And but to that point, that I also don't think it's fair to staff, to Brian and his department, or to Harold and his multiple departments that he oversees, to sit there and say, well, add economic development, which is such a big, important cog in the wheel of what we're trying to do, and then with our partners, to rope Harold into that and them to not have a point of contact with the city, I think is a gap. I do believe that is a gap. Again, that's a council decision for that employee in that position. And how do we make that work, or does that get rebirthed in some different form? Possibly. That is a position. I was the largest advocate by far on council for that position. I was the one who came with the ordinance change to get the city into economic development in 2018 with that position in mind, that the city needs to have a seat at the table when we are, to Harold's point and to Mike's point, when we're going after retail that directly conflicts with member investors for the Chamber EDC, they're in a tough spot. And can they do their job to the best of their ability? Are they going to do a bad job? No. But is it better served if the city of Minot fills that gap? And I believe yes. So again, I believe that position is, whether or not that's a recommendation that comes out of this committee or it is something that's reconsidered at the council level is up to budget recommendations and through the budget process is probably best where that conversation's had. But I do believe that the city benefits with that position if it exists within the position. And it's nothing new. Other communities do it across the country.
Yeah. Mark, something to add?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, not to push anyone along in any direction, I really appreciate the conversation. Is there an opportunity here for me to throw out 3 or 4 ideas on the service agreement that might encapsulate a couple things? The good communications, regular presentations, metrics that's been referenced. Item E, it says MAC EDC shall advise the city of Minot, and it talks about those things. If you want to put in a couple of pieces there, shall advise and communicate regularly with the city of Minot. And if you specifically, we already have later on that we're going to present twice a year. I think that's in a different bullet. If that's something you want to have in writing, I mean, that could be an easy way to say, okay, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's just put in the word communicate regularly in the right spot. If it's something where you want to say, I like the BRNEs and I like these other things, I mean, you probably want to keep B. That's a BRNE item. You probably want to keep K and L. K talks about primary sector RFPs. That was a key thing I know 4 or 5 years ago that we wanted to make sure that the city and MAC EDC and our other partners, that 6 of us weren't answering these state RFPs, that we had one good response to state RFPs. And then the touring services for prospective primary sector businesses, that's another one that we've worked very closely with the city to say, when we've had these experiences, when we're bringing someone in, we involve the mayor, we involve Harold, we involve Brian, we involve Jason Sorensen at those conversations. That might be a key one to keep. I referenced earlier, I feel like G, H, I, and J all kind of say the same thing. They all say, go do workforce development. And to someone's point, workforce development does change quite a bit. I mean, if you want to find some way to combine those, maybe not just squish them, but like condense and actually say, go do workforce development, period. If there's a way to do something like that. Just trying to think of ways to say, okay, everything that's been said here, I think there are elements of it in an agreement, and we can make the agreement easier to read, better to follow, more likely for you guys and for others to be able to understand, instead of looking at this and going like, I'm 3 pages in and I don't know what I just read. Let's try and make it easier to understand, easier to measure as well.
And again, I just want to, if you had a failure on my part, I want to make sure I communicate. When I talk about regular communication, I think that's done right now. I don't think, I don't think anybody's not trying to communicate. And so again, Mark, I don't
feel that way either. I feel like I don't know that I even saw the word regularly communicate in here. Now, maybe I missed it, but if it's valuable and you want to have it as a sort of a thing that you call out in the agreement, by all means, have it in there. If it's not,
yeah. And again, maybe that it doesn't do anything. It doesn't move the needle for me. I think there's that I just expect that. I expect that out of Harold, our leadership, steering the ship and leadership of the chamber. And I think that happens. And again, Dave, I'll look to Mr. Legba. Give me a thumbs up or a thumb down. I believe there was an agreement in the past between Chamber EDC before the merger, but I believe it was like 1 page. It was pretty thin, maybe 2 pages, 3 pages. I mean, it was pretty thin. And that was one of the things that we asked for the Chamber EDC and city staff to work on, was to craft the agreement that we have now that provides more transparency, provides more communication, provides just a pulse on what everybody's doing. So again, I think what we have is a huge improvement from where we were. Not to say it can't get better, but.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I found agreements going back as far as 2006 that I've seen, but in about 18 or 19, I think we've revamped those services agreements to be kind of the model that we have now, where it's a services agreement with an exhibit outlining all the measurables or the deliverables. And we implemented that across a number of organizations: First District Health Unit, MAC EDC, Service Basin, Commission on Aging, Council of the Arts. So they're all very similar, but that change was, I think, in 18 or 19.
I may continue. Thank you, Dave. I don't have any questions, but again, to that point, I think we did have an agreement. And now we've taken steps to make sure that the relationship between Chamber EDC is clearly defined on what we're kind of tasking them with. So again, I don't have a whole lot of improvements. Yeah, if we want to communicate regularly, I guess I don't know if it's like Did you hear from them this month? Did you hear from them? When did you last year? I mean, again, I don't know if it's really a metric we can measure, I guess, but again, I just wanted to clarify my statements that I believe those things are happening right now. And to Melinda's, Chairperson Melinda's point, like, I don't want to just put my thumb on them. And even to your point, Mike, Chairman, bless him. Again, I don't think we see any improvement from that. I think it's do what you're tasked to do, and we'll measure those when we get the reports.
Yeah, Jordan.
And, one of the things to what you just said, Alderman Pittner, I know we're trying to combat that narrative of measuring economic success by vibes, like you said. I struggle with this in my day job. One of the things I have to do is, evaluate local, national, regional economic conditions for credit losses. In our evaluation of credit losses, it is not easy to do because it kind of is one of those things that the economy is as good as you feel like it is, and you have to separate your biases and try to dig down into data. And one of the things I do to combat that is utilize, well, in our case, we have a consultant that we use to look at a myriad of different data points, and a lot of them are, the word I'm looking for here, they're surveys, like manufacturers index surveys, regional bank surveys, consumer sentiment indexes, things like that. I would imagine that, and I'm not a pro at some of this stuff, so when you talk about business development and expansion interviews, some of that kind of functions as that sentiment index, correct? Like, part of it is maybe just reporting back, hey, you talked to 6 companies in Minot this week or month. What are you hearing from them? And like, is there a way to measure their sentiment and get a feel over time of this is how it's moving up or down or vice versa? And can you measure the success of our economic development efforts and our business environment and climate that way?
Yeah, good, Mark.
Chairman, members of the committee, and that's one of the questions we ask in the BR&E. So the city council gets that data every 6 months. Our board of directors sees it every 3 months. That's why we do 40 to 50 to 60 interviews every year. Some people we do once a year, some people we do once every 18 months. We're always looking at that list. That happens right now. I think City Manager Stewart mentioned this earlier. There are surveys that the city has done every couple of years. I think those are valuable sentiment surveys, right? Those are valuable. What are you guys thinking? Taking your temperature. I agree with a lot of the metrics that are thrown out there, whether it's also building permits is one we get asked about a lot from developers outside the area. What do your building permits look like? What's your cost of living? We do the cost of living survey that's on the economy at a glance. That's done every quarter. I think those numbers, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, are there. Maybe they're not all right on one sheet of page, and they're not all updated every month because they all come from different sources. But I think what you're looking for from a metric standpoint is very possible, and I think that's where you get deliverables are good and metrics are good, and I think both of them play a role in this conversation about how do you know whether things are going well, or how do you know whether or not your agreement is a good agreement? How do you dispassionately try and measure the success of something that has a lot of passion around it?
Say, Mark, just to what I was going to get at with that is to what you just said. Maybe there's a way to clean up and summarize some of those things into a deliverable to council or whoever that would make it easier to translate the vibes into something actionable that you can evaluate.
And I
that's
think,
easy.
and that's Mark, I've got this because it's in your packet that you guys gave us. So these are the pieces that we get, right? And the interesting thing about it is, and this is where we will have even differences on council on what we're seeing, right? When I look at this and I see barriers to growth that include high labor costs, high costs of living, age or conditions of facilities, and number 4, uncompetitive tax rates, I look at all of these pieces and go, they're telling us exactly what the issue is, right? It's expensive to do business here in many different ways, and we need to take steps to go there. Now, I may look at our economic development programs as, in general terms, a net cost to what we're doing, where, Paul, you may disagree and say, no, that's the engine to what we're doing, right? I mean, and I think neither one of us is fully exactly right or wrong. The idea is that I think the consensus is in the world that you work in, Mark, is that this is the best we know how to do, right? We're using the techniques that have been proven and are the best we know how to do this. There's no magic bullet. There's no perfect way to do it, but we are using best practices. We are doing the things that we're collecting from other areas that seem to make sense for what we're doing. And there may be people like me that are skeptical of that. But at the same time, we also don't know if we turned it all off, are we headed for the dark ages in town, right? So there's, and I'm cognizant of that. I mean, a lot of what I do here as we're having these discussions is, as I've said all along, I'm pulling in one direction because I want there to be good, solid thought that backs up what we're doing. Not just the vibes, right? Not just the spaghetti getting thrown against the wall hoping, but that we're doing the things that we can in the right way to do it. Because for me, I feel a real burden to the people who elected me. And I believe that there was a sentiment that said, we are paying too much for everything we're doing, and we need to find ways to fix that. Now, there are those that would say economic development is a way to fix that. And I think, we have to hold that view as part of our discussion here. I hope you guys always kind of understand why I'm pulling that way consistently. Go ahead, Jordan.
One of the things I was going to say to that is I'm going to put on my hat of somebody that's not from here. You have to work in this town harder. Life's not fair. We have to work harder in this town than our cohorts in Fargo. Because my mom, I can't get her to come visit me. And it's because Minot's the end of the world. That is how people outside of the trade area of Minot feel about coming here. And that's super unfortunate because I moved here, planned to be here for a year. 17 years later, I'm still here. And I'm not going anywhere because I really like it here. But in how I look at some of that is, I'm maybe jumping the gun on some of our discussions or whatnot. It seems to me that we have to wave a bunch of dollars in the face to get outside attention to maybe look at coming here. And maybe there are things that we can do internally to cut red tape, be more business friendly. And then we wouldn't have to come back with dollars after the fact and smooth things over to keep the momentum going. And maybe that's where some of that focus has to be, and we can recoup some of these costs through not having to, spend so much on things like facade or things like that. Because, and I'll jump to something specific. It's so hard to get a building permit or go through onerous inspections. And I know that the builders just had a meeting with you, Alderman Pittner, and that's tremendous, that we're having those discussions because I see that as a huge need in this town. But maybe there's ways that we can boost our economic development without spending money. And, maybe I am pie in the sky as far as maybe I'm naive to that process. But I've seen plenty of very public examples that seem like we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. Is there a way to do this better without spending money? Just being a little more friendly.
And Jordan, until we hear from your mom, it could just be you.
It probably is.
But I'm joking. But again, to your point, I think it's a combination of those things, right? I think there is a reduction of red tape. But when I sat through that Minot Builders Association meeting, I didn't get a whole lot of, I mean, yeah, there was some individuals that were upset, and Tyler, you were there. Brian was there. Alderman Fuller's in the audience. He was there. At the end of the day, it was a lot of education. A lot of, you want us to do this? Well, we can't because that's state law. That's state building code. We can be more strict if you want, but we can't be less. You know, one of the items, and I'm in the process of reaching out to some of the membership with the board, and I want to get them to tell us how that meeting went. I can sit up here and tell you all day what my impression of that meeting was, or anybody that was there, but I want to hear from them. Do you feel better about the process? Are the concerns that you had being addressed? One of them was special assessments. That was probably the biggest one. That was the biggest one. In my opinion, my biggest takeaway was, you guys need to do special assessments. These don't pencil out for us. And nobody in their right mind would stick their neck out and make that kind of an investment unless the city is willing to help on that front. And that is a policy change. That's something for us as a council, the decision that we can make. We had one come before us and it got voted down. Now, we're not here to talk about that one individually, but in my opinion, that was one that was very clear-cut, minimal risk, and one that made sense. It didn't happen, but that's something that needs to be communicated with that organization and that leadership, and say, if you guys need this, then you need to come and communicate that with us so that we can carry this forward together and find solutions together versus saying, cut red tape. What red tape? We can't. We're in line with the state. So again, I want to get a follow-up and present that with council, present that to council, and or have that organization come and speak to council on some of the things that we collectively can agree on, that if you guys take these steps, we can see growth in these areas, and whether it's housing development or job creation or whatever it is. So, again, I think back to your point, I think it is true. We do have to work harder than Fargo. We do have to work harder than Bismarck, and that's clear cut. We haven't had state wrestling is going on right now in Fargo, North Dakota. It's gone on there every year since I was a junior in high school, and it ain't never gonna leave. Okay, used to go between Bismarck and Fargo, and actually Minot used to be in the rotation, and it'll never happen here. One, we don't have the facilities. We don't have the investment facilities to do that. Could that change? Yeah, possibly, but that takes a partnership between the city, parks, and these user groups to make those things happen. And I think having those regular lines of communication and understanding where those gaps can be filled, because I tell you what, I'd love to get some of these schools and communities from across the state to come to Minot for a state wrestling tournament, a state basketball tournament. We see what the economic impact is for the state fair, for Class B, the B, when it comes to town. And those are real things. Those are real things that we can go after and we can try to recruit and happen. And do we have to wave a few dollars at some of these things? Do we have to subsidize some of these things to happen? Yeah, but the economic impact, and the numbers are with Visit Minot. The economic impact of what we give to incentivize some of these and help raise up some of these organizations and user groups to get these things to come, whether it's officials or whatever it is. But when there's a $1.2 million economic impact over a 4-day weekend of tournaments, and we're having Canadian teams come down, we're having 48 Canadian teams come down for a fast pitch softball tournament that are shopping at our stores, that are eating at our restaurants, that are buying gas in our community. Those are the wins. And yeah, we do have to wave a few dollars. That shouldn't be a mystery, and I know that it's not to any of us up here, but I'm okay with that. That's reality. We can fold up shop and just say we're not going to do any of it, but then they'll drive right through. We will be a flyover community, and we should be happy with it then, I guess, at that point. So,
Yeah, Linda?
So is that something that an economic development director would help with?
I would defer to.
If we had a good one that was a good fit.
I'll defer to Harold on what gaps can be filled, but I think having someone in the city that's fully dedicated and devoted to that, and as much as it is in the forefront of Harold's mind or Brian's mind, that's not their job description. That's not the number one thing on their job. Can they hold a staff member accountable to making sure those things are delivered and those things are addressed? Yeah, but again, it comes down to partnerships with Visit Minot. Visit Minot carries that water at this point, and they do a damn good job of it. So
I think that's kind of why I brought that up, because I do feel like putting maybe that on and spread out amongst people isn't maybe the best idea. So I think that's initially why I had brought that up. You know, it isn't fair to them to have to take that on also, or maybe having somebody dedicated who really is educated in economic development and understands all that stuff. It is maybe something you guys should consider again in the future, because having that liaison might be a missing piece.
Yeah. George, you have something?
Oh, I'm
You
good,
Okay,
actually.
Paul.
I'll ask maybe this for Brian. Brian, when you talk to, because you've taken over this position as kind of our lead on retail recruitment, what is the first question someone asks you when it comes to a big box store, when they want to come to Minot? What is the number one question they probably ask?
Mr. Chairman, Alderman Pittner, incentives.
Thank you.
Usually, what does the city have to offer?
And that's the reality of the world we live in.
No.
And they're not asking just Minot. They're asking any community that they want to invest in. What can you do for me? And again, to have someone that has a full-time liaison to those investments, and yeah, sometimes you got to give a little to get a little, because we talked about this before. We talked about the big box stores, Costco's and Sam's Clubs and all that stuff. You want to give them a tax incentive? Do we need to give, the Walton family an incentive to come to Minot when they've got a printing press that is Walmart? Probably not. But I'll tell you right now, taxpayers, if you did a survey of what they want, they don't want to drive to Bismarck anymore to go to Costco. They'd rather drive across town to go to Sam's Club, and they'd probably be willing to give up some incentive to make that happen. That's just the reality.
Well,
and again,
and I think to your point, Paul, I agree with you on that. That if we went to the residents of the city right now and asked them for the things that they would be looking for, it would be those. Now, at the same time, that's what makes it so hard for me with all of the other stuff that we do, because I don't feel like we're not focused on that, which is what they're actually asking for. So go ahead, Jordan.
So here's a question for you. We got what, like $10 million sitting in the Magic Fund? Just had a meeting this morning, first time in a year and a half. I had to introduce myself to everybody again. But does the average everyday citizen look at the $10 million sitting in there and say, you know what I'd really love in this town right now? Some more primary sector economic development. Or would they rather see us find a way, and I don't even know if you can do it because there's statute and everything else, spend that money and try to bring something in that the people want.
it's called a TIF.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just being honest. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I mean, that's what those tools are. They're in state law. I mean, they're tools that are afforded to our communities to incentivize growth and investment from those types of investments. I mean, that's what they are.
And then becomes the conundrum though of if you're talking a TIF, people hear that and they say that's bad. We don't want that because we've seen those things. And then we ask the question, well, what do you want? And that's where I struggle with, because it's like, hey, if this is the will of the people and it's what they want, maybe we need to redirect and focus some on the gaps in, and as much as consumer services are not primary sector economic development in the minds of the consumer, what is their primary want? It's a question I found myself asking this morning, because we don't ever have, we have flex-paced requests, and they're getting a robust amount of requests, and that is your ma and pa small business that's here. It's the least restrictive, not earmarked money that Jimmy at Jim's backhoe service that's took over from his dad Dave 43 years ago. If he wants to expand his company, he can apply for that. And it's the one thing that those people have access to. The rest of it is earmarked for specific goals for the city, and I'm not here to debate those, but is that what the taxpayers are looking for with those funds? I'm asking that's a higher level question.
I agree, and again, where I have trouble again then is, so let's say we're putting $40,000 into a buy down of the loan rates. I don't even know if they add up to that much. Maybe they're not even that big, because we're just talking about buying down the interest rate, right? But as we're doing that, at the same time that we've got property tax rates that are, in my opinion, still through the roof, we're taking it from a different group to make sure this guy gets it, and directing that kind of through the bureaucracy. I want to go back, Mark, you got something to add. I'll let you do that, and then I'll go back to something else.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, have you seen the movie Inside Out? You guys are all the voices inside my head as I go throughout my daily job, because everything you're talking about is conversations that we have in economic development, and it's a balancing act. But that's what I've come to find out after 4 years. It's a balancing act of trying to do all the things that you're talking about. And you're not going to get Costco or Sam's Club here until you have more jobs here. So you have to do some primary sector recruitment to get the Costco or Sam's Club here. And at the same time, primary sector is going to go where there are Costco's and Sam's Clubs. So you have to try and recruit that Costco and that Sam's Club in order to get that. So you see the revolving circle that we're going in at the Catch-22, which is why we take on a broader economic development effort. We're not just doing primary sector. You mentioned startup Minot efforts. You have contracts with Service Basin Planning Council to do the FlexPay side. Thank goodness for a Visit Minot and those partnerships that are there. Otherwise, we wouldn't have those tourism opportunities. We wouldn't have a great Scandinavian Heritage Park that adds to the quality of life here. We wouldn't have the Mesa if we didn't have a great park district. We could go on and talk about all these things that are a part of it, and I don't know that you could ever point to any one of them and say that was the reason it succeeded or failed. So you have to do a lot of different things in this area. And I think you have to be nimble about doing all those things, which is part of the reason why I think we would lean toward a one-page service agreement. Something that says, okay, we trust you, we know you, you're talking to us all the time, you're with us all the time. We want you to do these 6 things, don't forget, do BRNEs, do the touring. We want you to handle workforce development. We're not going to give you a list of 19 things to do in workforce development. Do workforce development. Tell us how it's going. Give us your measurements tied to that. Tell us what that looks like. Tell us where you can improve. Have a real good, honest conversation about that, but don't have it be 3 or 4 or 5 pages of overly prescriptive materials. That would be my suggestions on that. And thank you for the Inside Out experience. It's been really good to see that.
Go ahead, Tyler.
You brought up exactly, you articulated it very well when you were talking about building permits earlier. And the metrics I'm talking about, again, I want to reiterate, I don't want them in this contract. It has to be something that you and your board designed and that the city agrees upon. It should not be in here. However, when you look at these metrics and you brought up building permits and you go, shoot, we want building permits to be here as a city and they're down here. It's not defund EDC at that point. That's not the intent. It's the intent to throw it back on council and go, shoot, what are we gonna do now? Building permits stink. Okay, maybe we got to take money from facade and dump it into some sort of special assessments. That's the kind of creativity that I was thinking of about diverting funds amongst all of this economic development to what do we actually want in the city? Yeah, if with infinite resources we could do them all, but if there's something we really want, let's go after it. And again, maybe that's not housing at this point, but yeah.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I think that's why the city, at Brian's request a couple years ago, said let's put back on that new construction property tax abatement opportunity. And that actually came up in that meeting with the builders a week ago, and some of them were aware of it and some of them were not. And that's constantly how it goes. I've talked to some businesses who didn't know that the Chamber EDC, Chamber and Economic Development, had combined, and even what they were separate. And so we have those conversations all day, every day. I know the city staff does that all the time. I mean, there's a reason why you see a recycling message every other day on their Facebook page. It's because people need more information about recycling over and over again, or street repairs, or what we're doing in the police department or the fire department. And so you just keep having that conversation with folks.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, so I'm going to put my park board hat on here for a minute. And, so we have a sales tax ordinance coming up, and I'm not here to promote that by any means, but I probably want to give some history on how we got to that point. And Paul brought up community facilities fund and the softball tournaments and those things. And, back in 2023, when we were creating the 2024 budget, we had a retreat and looked out to 25, 26, 27, 28, and what were going to be some of our needs, and how are we going to complete those, and how are we going to achieve those? And there's a new turf facility that's kind of the the big prize, right, that's being promoted, but there's also other things that we need to do. We need to replace the roof on Mesa Arena. We need to replace the roof on the auditorium. There's this next coming summer, we're putting $1 million filter system in the pool. So those type of things. So we were looking at other revenue sources of how can we generate revenue to do those. And the community facilities fund was one area that we talked about, and that's died, right? So that's where we shifted now. That's where we got to the sales tax ordinance, and we're going to let the citizens decide on what direction they want to go. But going back to when Mayor Ross called me and asked me to be on this committee, when I think of economic development, this is just me, the first thing that goes in my mind is tourism, is bringing people to Minot. And I'll agree, Grand Forks and Fargo, we're never going to compete with them. So why try? Let's go after Canada. Let's go after Montana. We got to quit worrying what Fargo and Grand Forks are doing and focus more on us. And I think back to like the 2010, 11, 12s when oil industry was going crazy, housing industry was going crazy, and I was managing property in Williston, Bismarck, Minot, Fargo, Grand Forks, Jamestown, Devils Lake, and Minot was really the hub. Minot and Bismarck, really. People wanted to live in Minot and Bismarck. And why did they want to live in Minot or Bismarck? Because Williston didn't have an airport. Williston didn't have a mall. Williston didn't have these things, right? And Dickinson's probably the same boat. Well, now you look at Williston and Dickinson. Williston's got the airport. They're getting a Taco Bell, and that's a win for them, right? Everybody's fired about Taco Bell. So those type of things where people now, especially I see it in people that work in the oil field industry, they're in Williston, their family's in Oklahoma, Texas, wherever. Now it's the wife's like, either you're coming home or we're going there. Well, now they're finding places to live in Stanley, Tioga, Williston. They don't have to. Before in 2012, 2013, they were coming here going, I'm going to live in Minot because I'm not moving my kids to live in Williston, Watford City, those type of cities. And now those cities we're competing with those cities now, I think. I think we got to get Grand Forks and Fargo out of the mind. And I hate going to Grand Forks and Fargo. I hate it. But you know what? I go to a Sioux game every year. I go to a Bison game every year. But I think we need to focus on quality of life, and that's a lot of different things, right? It's one thing of having a parent that has a swimmer, and they're going, we got to go to Bismarck this weekend for a swim meet, or a gymnast. I'm going to Fargo for gymnasts this week. Let's get that to start coming here and get those things here. Like Paul, we're probably never going to get the state wrestling tournament. Probably never going to see it again. We had the girls' state hockey tournament one year, and apparently it wasn't good enough for the High School Activity Association, so they moved it back to Grand Forks and Fargo. We have the Pepsi rink that's beautiful. We have Minot is starting to turn into the U.S. sled team's training camp. This is where they're going to have their training facilities at. They're going to be here twice this year now. So those type of things, I think, I'm maybe shooting myself in the foot, but I'm sick of Grand Forks and Fargo. And I think we need to quit focusing on that and focus on Canadian residents, Western North Dakota, Eastern Montana, and focus there and do what we can. And if the turf facility comes to light, we have big plans for that. And I think I see a shift in the Park District, turning economic development being on the radar of what's the next big event we can have here to generate more sales tax, because that's going to benefit the Park Districts. And that's going to benefit, if every restaurant in town's full, Chick-fil-A is going to come here, right? If every hotel's full, another hotel's going to pop up. Those type of things, I think, is going to be important. So that's my high horse for the day.
No, that's fine. And actually, Justin, one of the things that comes to mind when you talk about that, and we were talking about whether it's Costco, Sam's, any of those, I think right now, if we went to a vote of the people and said, hey, do you want us to pursue Costco and it's going to cost us $5 million and here's how we're going to go about funding it, we'd probably get a yes on it, right? I mean, I think we don't do those things that way. But I do think we don't want to be detached from the people. And that's why, I may or may not vote for you guys' turf place, but it's the right way to go about it. And especially on the park side, because in my mind, you guys are very focused on quality of life. That is what the Parks Department is about. City for me is a little bit different. City for me is about service. It's about providing the best services we can at break even at the lowest cost possible. That's the way I look at what the city is meant to do. And I think where I have a little bit of trouble working with city stuff is when we branch out from those. When we do think that the role is, oh, we need to go and bring this thing in, or we need to be involved in these things. That's why I think, you know, in like in the case of MAC EDC, having that partner to do that may be the right way to go, because it's not something we intend at least to build expertise in. Now, it's not to say we couldn't, and we might not have to look at that in the future. Melinda, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I also think too, like just focusing on what we already have and making sure it's really good, like keeping the city clean, making sure the curbs and all that stuff is, you know, it's like that's something that I feel has kind of fallen away a little bit since I grew up here, like overgrown weeds, making businesses accountable for keeping their lots clean and just making it look nice overall is really helpful when people come through here. And I think that's something that we could all improve on. I don't know, maybe there's incentives for businesses to do that, or, you know,
Or at least to stick when they don't, right?
Or
And
like when they don't. I mean,
and
we
I
have a
think
very-
coming out of the last surveys, I think Harold and his team have had a lot of focus on that. And
yeah.
you know, I'd like to think over time, we're gonna see a lot of improvements in those areas and a lot of things moving in the right direction, because I know his team is focused there a lot. But, yeah, Paul?
Maybe city staff can speak to this. We're taking a more proactive approach to ordinances and nuisances, and we actually have an employee now that's taking a proactive role to curb some of that. So that,
Yeah.
to that point, that's happening now.
And I, you know, back where you guys are in downtown, you know, a big thing for me is we can get everybody here for a wonderful tournament, but if they can't get down the sidewalk because of the snow, we got an issue, right? Or if they can't park and all the things that go with that. So those things all certainly matter very much, and those are things that are, in my opinion, the responsibility of the city and that we want to get right.
I think though, like even downtown for sure, like you, if you can acknowledge, like I feel like businesses really do want their area to be nice downtown, and they do kind of put some into it, and maybe acknowledging like just something simple as like a spot, like, oh, look, this business, how nice and clean it is, or like us all getting together and cleaning up the alleys once a month, or just like, those are things that don't cost any money at all, that I think businesses could do too. Or,
And I
or
think your
community.
association does a pretty reasonable job on those types of things,
They
right?
do, and they do
Yeah.
it with no funding.
Yeah.
So there are, like, acknowledging some of that stuff that does happen in town, I think helps maybe shift some donations towards them too, you know, knowing that they're putting that work in and putting those flowers up. And there's other organizations that do those types of things too, but maybe recognizing some of that activity.
Again, just to Melinda, to your point, and I've been an advocate for this from my first days on council, and I know it needs to come from the Downtown Business Association, but a bid district that would empower, give more local control to businesses downtown to have supplemental services when it comes to snow. And again, it has to be, if it's essential services, it doesn't have to be anything spectacular. But when it comes to a business improvement district for downtown, where you guys are able to tax yourselves and set a budget so that we do want to go towards these beautification efforts of keeping, you know, additional snow removal, that it is a responsibility of the business owners, but maybe that's an avenue, and I want to. It's not going to come from the city. The city's not going to be the one to champion that. But I think when we talk about being partnerships and partners with organizations, I think that would go that's a Paul Pittner opinion there. I think that would go such a long way in a partnership between the city and Downtown Business Association if a bid district was formed, and maybe it is. You know, hey, we can fund volunteers, and you can go to Labor Services or Labor America, and you can get people to walk the alleys and clean them up, or you can walk people to pick up trash. I think that's an avenue, and Michaela, write it down as a bullet point. You know, that is a real thing that would give a lot of fuel to the downtown economic engine, in my opinion. But again, that's something for you to take back to your user group, and that's your homework.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I feel like there was some discussions before, but I've only been back for like 3 years now, so I'm not as familiar with that. I'm learning a little bit more as people talk about it. But yeah, I think there's probably some creative ideas that maybe could be brought back around. I'm still new in the game, but pretty proud of downtown. So.
Okay, I wanted to step back just for a second. Paul brought up the idea of special assessments and just what that can look like. you know, one of the things that's, I've said repeatedly, we have to be very careful that we don't end up where West Fargo is, right? Where no matter what home you're looking at buying, there's a big special on it, and about the time that it's done, you're paying for your straight again through the next special, and it's just a perpetual thing. Their property taxes are a little lower than ours, but everybody's paying the same amount because of the specials. So there's got to be a happy medium. I mean, we certainly can't go crazy with it. Now, on the other side of me says that what we're doing if we do that is we're saying housing is to be put on a pedestal, right? It's because it's holding us back maybe in certain ways. We're willing to say for a certain set of businesses, we're willing to be the funding mechanism to make your project go, right? Now, we're doing that on other things. I mean, that's what FlexPace is to a certain extent too, or Facade to a certain extent is that. There's a lot of pieces of that. But we're saying to an industry, if you want to go get your project done, we're willing to be that participant in that, and we're willing to put the people on the hook for it. So in that way, we're setting it on that pedestal. And I guess maybe the argument is that housing is holding us back. And if that's the case, then that's something that's got to be looked at. But I look to our bankers on the committee. Is that where we're at? And Justin, same thing with you on the housing side. Is that where we're at today? Are we in a position where we're being held back on growth because of housing?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I might call on Mr. Billingsley. He happens to know all the single-family lots in the city, and I'd asked this at a previous meeting, and he agreed that we're running low on inventory, right? And in a perfect world, the private sector would step in and build lots, correct? However, when you have developers developing, in Fargo, Grand Forks, and Bismarck's, the other three larger communities, they do specials. So I hate that we're to this point again, but other communities throw money at economic development. We have to come to the table as well. Other cities are going towards special assessments. Something we got to look at if we're good and getting towards low inventory. So.
Yeah. Brian, do you want to add a little color to that?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Neither, when we conducted our arrested development study 2 years ago, we had approximately 325 buildable lots. These were lots that had sewer, water, streets ready to go. These were shovel-ready, development-ready lots. Since that time, I think we've developed close to half of those in terms of building permits. So that number's probably under 200 today. We're going to be starting up a developer training here in the month of April, and I'm going to be working on updating that study to see where that number is today. And I should have some numbers within 2 months. But yeah, those numbers are dwindling, and we need more buildable lots for future development.
Jordan?
I to what Tyler just brought up, and in my mind, he's totally correct. If I'm a developer, I like to play devil's advocate, probably too often. But if I'm a developer and Minot's short on lots to begin with, so acquiring land is more expensive because of function of supply and demand, and Bismarck and Fargo, try not to use Fargo and Grand Forks, because for the record, I agree with you on that. And I'm from within an hour there. That's why it comes up sometimes, but I'm with you. But we'll just use Bismarck. If it's cheaper to acquire land there and it's cheaper to do the work because the special assessments are there, they're going to vote with their pocketbooks. I mean, if they've only got so much development they can do, and they're not gonna go to the place that's gonna make them the least amount of money, because that's a for-profit enterprise, and that's where it's gonna go. And it's funny you brought up West Fargo. I got a brother that lives there, and their specials are nuts, and people complain to high heavens about the cost of specials and whatnot. But they still have a pile of housing demand. And again, I guess it maybe goes back to there's other factors that outweigh that, and they're able to pass some of those costs off because of the overwhelming demand that maybe we need to measure our, approach to this, because it's not fair to like compare apples to oranges in that case. But what I see is the places where there are special assessments in this state have a lot of citizens that complain about special assessments in this state, but they're the places that are developing and growing. And maybe that's your, not, the vibes aren't what's, the vibes towards special assessments are bad, but the housing starts and the growth suggest otherwise. And maybe that's where the city's got to go to get some of that.
So Grand Forks, West Fargo and Fargo are certainly in that world. What's Bismarck doing? Go ahead, Tyler.
Chairman, when I was on the planning commission, I actually called all of these communities to understand how they did special assessments as it relates to single-family lot development. Bismarck does it a little bit differently, in which the city actually goes in and puts in those infrastructure improvements themselves, not the contractor. The contractor doesn't go ahead and do that. The city does it themselves. West Fargo do it a little bit differently, where the developer will actually put in those improvements, and then they'll be reimbursed when they're completed, when they get their C of O, basically. And then they bond from that point and repay the developer. So a couple different ways on those communities and how they do it. One reason I like Bismarck's model is you make sure you get the improvements done correctly. We don't have this, the roads are cracked up and beat up after 5 years, right? The developer did a shoddy job on it. So that's one reason I like Bismarck's model. And if we don't decide to go down this road of special assessments as it relates to single-family lots, I would entertain, is there anything else we can do in the form of a developer credit to where they have a 2 or 3 year abatement on their taxes? Okay. Now, it seems like Minot's doing everything. We got a tax credit for everything. However, if we're competing against those other communities that shall not be named, I think we have to come out with all the ammo we can.
And I guess my question would be then should our approach instead be to try to lower the taxes overall? Instead of picking out, okay, well, you're doing this, so you're going to get the abatement, but everybody else is going to pick that up. And this kind of leads me to something that we'll have a discussion on as we finish up here. We've got a certain amount of money that we're collecting from sales tax right now. That's kind of the main method that we're going about this. That's one of the things that we can do is we can make some recommendations back to council to say, hey, of the roughly 2.1 million, let's say that's going to come in, here's some ways that we think it could be used to move things along. So is that helping to do some of that stuff? Is it helping to do some infrastructure things? I mean, one of the other things that comes to my mind is I would love to say, let's reimburse the general fund based on all those abatements we're already doing. That's all economic development, right? We're trying to grow the city. We're trying to make things better. So when we have new building abatements, when we have new resident abatements, the ones for all the new ones that are coming in, TIFs, Renaissance zones, should we be reimbursing the taxpayer through the general fund using the sales tax dollars to do that? Maybe it's $100,000 a year. Maybe it's 150. I don't know what the number is. I'd like to get that. But that's the kind of thing that makes me think, how can we get the taxpayer whole again through this whole thing? Because the elderly woman who owns her house and has for the last 40 years is paying for all of this stuff. Whether it's through her, when we do that abatement, we're spreading the wealth to everybody else to pay for it. She's paying through her sales tax. She's paying through her property tax. She's paying in every different direction. And maybe she goes out to a restaurant every now and then, but that's the benefit that she's getting today. So those are the types of things I think that we can do. We got to figure out what's the best use of that. And maybe it is some infrastructure. That's one of the things I think I threw out in a previous conversation. As we were looking at what's going on around Ramstead, if the school board moves that direction, that might be something I'm interested in talking about. Not the whole works, not to put all the infrastructure in, but the main thoroughfare east and west right along the south side of Ramstead that needs to be hooked up so that you got another entrance in. I might be willing to look at something like that because it makes sense and it's going to bring a lot of traffic and it starts to open up that area to development. So I think that there's ways that we could look at that. But again, I would love to see if we were doing that we're calling that economic development then, and we've already got those funds, let's use it to pay for that. If we're going to bond it, or whatever we're going to do, use those funds to actually help support that. Okay, Tyler?
Mr. Chairman, in future meetings, should we as a committee be prioritizing these on our own mind? And should we be keeping, going through each one of this, should we be prioritizing this and saying, okay, in the city of Minot, we need building, or we need lots? That'd be my, should we be doing that as a committee in future meetings, bringing that up and saying, these are the Economic Development Committee's priorities?
Yeah, because, and I think, if you look back, and I don't know if, Michaela, if you can switch over to that one, to the other document. That was the other discussion I wanted to get to today. We might actually wrap up here relatively quick, because I feel like we're kind of at a breaking point. But that's where I want to go next. This first list that Michaela's brought up there is, what is that success? What were we trying to do from the beginning, and what should we be trying to do? And so as we continue to develop this, that you got it exactly right, Tyler. That's what we're going to be doing here is, what do we think is the most important items that we've got written down? And we might have still more that we need to add to this list, but those are the conversations now, so that we actually start developing this and honing it to the priorities we're going to send back. What I could see is, maybe here's a set of actionable things we think council could move on that would make a difference right away. And then maybe there's another longer list that says, hey, for the future, here's some things that are also ideas, right? And so that those priorities, we can send those back to the council and we can take a look at them. Okay, does that make sense? Or if you got thoughts,
Yep,
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, point of clarification, are we done with the public input or the individuals?
No, the only thing that I would say, I think we're through the main presentation phase. We will have one, I believe it'll be the second meeting of March, and I'll be clear this time that I get it right. It's the Child Care Committee. Lisa Olson, I think, is gonna come and talk to us about childcare needs and things from that committee that's been going on. And I think it'll give us just some other insight kind of into workforce things, childcare things. She asked about coming to give us some of that insight. So we'll do that in March. But other than that, yeah, now as we go forward, we're starting to hone the document we're gonna send to council. So I think really, as a working group, we've maybe got 3 or 4 meetings left to get the work complete. Now, as we've talked about, it may be that we actually say to council, create a committee that's an ongoing thing, that this was kind of the start of. But I feel like that's kind of where we're at. We're getting to the point where I think we've gotten enough knowledge within the group where now we can hone what we're sending back to council. Okay, does that make sense, Tyler?
Yep.
Okay. All right, anything else to add today?
Just
Yeah,
comment,
go ahead, Paul. Yep.
again, just to one of the comments you brought out that as far as should the overall goal of versus looking at specials or whatever, keep the tax burden low, keep taxes low, and I think that's the goal, right? No matter what, it still doesn't solve the investment in infrastructure for developers. They're the ones making the investment on the front end. That's where they can shift some of their risk on their project. And when they stick their neck out and anybody who's willing to invest millions of dollars into infrastructure in a community, I get it. That's a tall ask. So again, if we can use specials and whatnot to curb some of that risk, I think it's something worth looking at, and it's being asked for from our Builders Association. So again, and then just back to, so I want to have some homework here for everybody and myself. So Mike, we're going to have a child care committee meeting. You said, so what is left? What else do we need to do to get across the finish line? Because I feel like when I look at this list, I can circle the ones that we could probably send to council for us to discuss, because this committee's not going to make any of those decisions. But just recommendations. So I think I can circle what recommendations I'd like to see to come to council. So outside of that child care committee, and I don't know if they're going to come with like a dollar amount recommendation. Again, that's up to them. But what else should we be doing? What are we going to be doing in the other few meetings?
Yeah, so I think what we need to go next, and like I said, we'll cut it off here. What the next discussion was going to be to go through the bulleted list that we have so far, to make sure that we've got things worded the way we want, maybe expand on some of the bullets to get them to where we want them to be, but to start honing that down then. And so if you do have time between now and what would be the first March meeting, you definitely could do that and do that yourself through the list that we've got. And Michaela, was that on our last meeting invite, or I can maybe send it out to one or the other?
I can add it. It was part of the packet, so
Right.
no, I didn't add the Word document separately.
Okay. So that's something that we'll get out to everybody to make sure that you've got it in hand. But if you want to start going through that yourself and kind of in your mind, what are our priorities? Where are we headed here? And what kind of recommendations do we want to make? Because that's what we need to get to. We need to hone that down to a set of recommendations that, like I said, I think ones that the council could take action on. along with some other ideas longer term that we should be focused on. So that's my thinking. And if we can start that process up in March, we'll have the childcare one and the second one, and then the April meeting is might just be one in April where we finish it up and send it to council.
Just so I'm clear, so we're gonna come up with a recommendations, and are we looking to vote on those as a committee, saying, hey, this is the message we want to come out of
I
this
think,
committee?
yeah, exactly. I
Okay.
think that's what that would be, is we would vote on the final document being sent up. And, you know, hopefully by that time, we've gone through the discussion and we're in pretty good agreement about the recommendations that we're making. There might be some individual pieces, and what I would say is we will maybe start with a working set, and we can use motions to move things off and on, so that we kind of come to consensus, because that's the point of bringing together people from different backgrounds, right? Is there's different consensus we'll come to, and we'll be able to move those things on and off and come to that concise set and go from there. Does that sound good?
3 meetings, we're thinking?
I think so.
Okay.
I think we'll have the 2 in March and then maybe the 1 in April. Hopefully that'll finish it up right there. I think the update that I gave the other night to the mayor was that we'd likely present it in one of the May council meetings. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right, anything else for anybody? All right, well, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second?
We are adjourned. Thank you.